on for the past 2.5 years. But unfortunately, we're behind closed doors. So we're venturing, like everybody else, into the online world. And we're here this afternoon to present this online, a first for the gallery, conversation between Mary Burke, the artist, NicGhabhann, academic, and Manchán, Magan, the broadcaster and writer. I think we're in for a really stimulating and provocative, perhaps, exchange of ideas, and I just would urge you to sit back and enjoy this experience. Over to you, Manchán, agus go míle mágat.
Fáilte una, cinnte tá sé seo co-hatson. So normally we'd be all surrounded by artworks that were having this sort of tangible, this powerful impact on our eyes, on our senses, on our skin, and we'd be with people who are all appreciating that room as much. And so now what we're doing, it's different, but it's more focused, but it can be as intense. What we're going to get a chance to do is to focus on the work of art, and maybe not without the distractions. There's often, an opening night or any exhibition will often have this sense of you wanting to focus on the art, and there being so many other things going on at the same time. And like this is one of these exhibitions that is like a threshold. It's a changeover moment in so many things. First in Mary Burke's work, and we'll discuss that with Mary in a little bit, after 40 years of focusing on one series, on one theme, on managing to sort of quietly and beautifully honor the suburban sanctuary spaces of this country. She's moving on to something else. But also, the title of the exhibition gives so much. At home on the farm. Like, when do you ever see that word, the farm, connected with an art exhibition, with an art gallery? Like Limerick City Gallery of Art is doing something really radical here, doing a new departure, bringing this key element of Irish society, farm, into the world of art. And like, you might think a little bit, you might have seen some 19th century images of sort of bucolic images of a nice farm, but actually the reality of modern day agriculture, the reality of the people and the places that are now producing the food we eat, nobody represents that. There's been a tiny few artists who've gone into marts in recent years. But the mart, it's because it's the drama of a mart. A mart has very little to do with the actual production of our food. It's almost, and it just ties in, the bull ring or something else. Mary Burke has done something really radical, as I say here, really revelatory here, by focusing in her quiet, humble, but equally revelatory way on these farms. And so what I'd like to do is just for a minute is to name the 5 farmers that Mary has selected, because even that, like, each one has a different outlook on the world and a different way of making us see our world, this country, and particularly farming, this business that has been the core of so much of us and is now absolutely changing. It's both industrializing and is having big questions asked about its future sustainability. So there's John McNamara down in a hospital, who is like a visionary and pioneering grass farmer on 116 acres or hectares. And Mary's work reveals it all, but he has this scientific way of farming. Then the exact opposite is Morgan Murphy down in Kilmallock in County Limerick, who is trying to go back to the old ways of farming. The thing that gives him the greatest pride is the fact that he still has grassland that has never been reseeded. That is, he says, is the original grasses that would have been developed after the last ice age. Then Morgan will contrast beautifully with June Danaher, who is, for 40 years, she has been farming in Shannagolden. She's originally from North Lancashire. And as she says, farming has always been done by women. We always think of men, but actually farming, as she claims, has been women have been the backbone of farmers. And her pride limousine herd is just beautiful to look at. But the main thing that she wants to farm is to farm with soul, to farm with resonance and sustainability. And then Dan Brown, who is a grandson of a War of Independence fighter who has taken over the farm, the traditional farm that his grandfather would set up once all the fighting had finished, is now retired, but is so proud that he was able to rear a family of 5 children who all went to college on 80 head of cattle. And then David Ryan in Lochgar, in the mysterious, magical Lochgar by the sides of it, who actually farms on Knockadoon Hill, an area that was an entranceway to the other world. So Mary has managed to find 5 very different farmers who each give us a glimpse into this, as I say, key element of Irish society that almost no artist has looked at. So Mary, I have so many questions to ask you, but first, how did you get, end up focusing on this theme?
Well, it's actually not as big a jump as you might think, or maybe in my head it's not as big a jump. It all comes out of suburbia originally. And 2 previous projects. A project I did that I completed in 2015 called House Portraits, which was managed by Tallaght Community Arts, managed and funded by Tallaght Community Arts in conjunction with Maynooth University, where I went into the homes of 10 residents in Jobestown and Killinarden in West Tallaght. And I suppose it was very much, these were about very specific places, and I interacted with the homeowners and made portraits of their local authority homes. And out of that, I was asked to do another similar project by Muir Nichhabhann in Laois County Council to do portraits of homes in a rural town in County Laois called Stradbally. And again, that seemed somewhat similar, dissimilar as well, but somewhat similar to the local authority houses in Tallaght, going into the houses, painting interiors, interacting with the owners. But while most of the houses were centred in the town, a couple of them were outside the town, and one of the houses was actually on a farm. And while I was focusing, remember driving out, going in, and I was inside the house, which was not particularly a farmhouse, was actually a new build, a relatively new built house. But I was looking at the fields, I was looking at the animals, which were not going to feature in this project, and the sheds and everything else. And I thought, I'd actually like to tackle some of this. This looks like this could be a really rich area. And it stayed in the back of my mind for about a year, until Una, you invited me to put in a proposal for a project in Limerick. And I think you might have possibly been thinking that I'd do something urban or suburban initially. And I just said, what about farms? I mean, Limerick has it all. You've got, it could have gone urban, it could have been suburban or rural. And since I put my big toe in the water with the going into a rural town, a small rural town, I thought, let's go more rural. So that's where it started.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just to give viewers in the audience a sense of quite how suburban you were. So one of your last exhibitions was Suburban Narratives. That was in 2016. The previous Suburban Shadows, 2010. Semi-Detached Reflections was 2005. Suburban Scapes was 1992. We can go right back to 1988, where it was Halls and Stairs. So you were very, very good at painting brick walls and painting roads and painting windows and the reflections in windows and those shiny cars outside suburban houses. Like, was it a strain on one's skill set to suddenly have the entirety of nature, not only sort of the wildness of nature, but then this industrial, formalized farming type of environment too?
It was, it was an extension of what I had been doing. Bizarrely, people mightn't think that, in that there's nature in suburbia. It's a very tame, sanitized nature. You've got your little green patch in front of your garden. You've got your herbaceous borders. But it still is a certain amount of nature. You have to tackle grass. You have to tackle foliage. So it's just, there's an awful lot more of it when you go rural. But I suppose initially, when I was doing it, I thought I would focus more on a combination of the homes and the farmyard and the fields. But when I actually got to even to the first farm, I just saw all the yard, the tools, the vastness, and it was a combination of knowing that I had this gorgeous space in Limerick City Gallery to fill, which is a daunting thing in itself, and also standing surrounded by large barns, I suppose farmyards, and then the rolling landscape. I thought, well, the first thing I had to do was I had to go bigger than I'd ever gone before. And I don't paint. I call them paintings, but I work with oil pastels, which are essentially a refined crayon. So when you're doing a 4x4 canvas with a little stick of crayon, it takes a lot of time. So they were very labor intensive. I'd say that was the main challenge, but also a wonderful way to get totally lost in the work. And I think, as I've mentioned this to Una before, that as the works built up around me in my studio, it was nearly like entering Limerick every time I opened my studio door. I'd travel 30 feet from my house to the studio in the back garden, open the door, and it's like going into Narnia or Doctor Who's TARDIS. I'm suddenly in another world. I'm suddenly in this space I've created for myself in lockdown, which is a year earlier, 2019, in rural County Limerick. And I've escaped to rural County Limerick right through lockdown, just doing these works.
And that's what people are going to find with this exhibition. The images are so evocative. There's an element of photorealism to them. You are there, of hyperrealism. You are immersed in a farm scene and seeing it with a sort of sharper focus than one normally sees. And that's what's different. Rather than the artist saying, oh, that's a nice texture of a field or something, you are actually immersing us in farming, which is something, as I say, we don't get to do. Now, as you said, for creating the work, there were two different elements of it, I suppose. One, you're visiting the farm, and then, I don't know how many months, you're doing to say 2 years, this is you're in the studio. But can you talk to me about that interaction between you and the farmers? How was that? Was it comfortable? Was it easy? Because again, maybe it could be said that artists and farmers aren't natural bedfellows.
Well, it's one of the things, and it came with the earlier projects as well. What I suppose very often as an artist, you out of necessity, you spend a lot of time on your own, locked away in a studio, which is lovely in itself. But being able to get out and meet people that you would never meet otherwise. I had a fantastic 2019. I visited over a period of, I suppose, a number of months from the spring of 2019 really through to the autumn. I made a series of farm visits, and I met wonderful people. It was an incredibly rich, enjoyable experience. My sense of direction is not great when I'm driving, so I got lost up little backtracks in rural County Limerick, East and West Limerick, eventually finding the farms. And every farmer, I mean, they were so generous, they were so welcoming and so open. And I mean, there's a certain trust letting a perfect stranger into not only your home, but also your place of work. And this is something that is so close to them. They're incredibly proud of their farms. There's a duty of care to their animals. It's a passion. It's not just work. It's not just a job. It is a job, and I'd say it's hard work, but they love their farms. It's and I suppose that sort of passion, you'd wonder. From what I could see, it's a hard life. It's a lot of hard work, and you could say, why would you do this? And I could see parallels between farming and being an artist, because a lot of people would, and sometimes I scratch my head and say, why do I do this? When you have to love what you do. As an artist, you have to love what you do, because you don't make a whack of money at it, and it's hard work. And same could be said for farming. They work really, really hard, and they so much love what they do. So I could see quite a lot of parallels that mightn't necessarily be obvious. You could think, yes, art and farming are very different, and they are in certain cases, but there are parallels there too, which I discovered.
Yeah, and so as part of this, I wrote a series of. I interviewed the farmers myself and wrote this piece for the brochure, and I have a smaller piece of it in this Irish Times article that should be in there today. I haven't looked yet, but it is showing that, as you said, they are equally passionate, and that they were equally intrigued by you drawing them, creating these paintings of them. So it was like this two-way talk, because we don't reflect, we don't sort of honor the artist, the farmer in that way. You'll have loads of artists painting boxers and sort of other things, but and business and sort of great architectural buildings, but not art. So was there something that you ultimately wanted to convey in At Home at the Farm, that was At Home on the Farm, that was different from what you would be conveying in your previous work, in the more suburban work? Was there a message?
Well, funnily enough, I don't see it as being that different to what I was doing with the suburban, particularly the place-specific projects of house portraits and townscape. I was trying to get the essence of these particular farms. It's not, I'm not qualified, I don't know enough about farming to be making big statements about farming in Ireland or even farming in Limerick. And I wouldn't even think that these 5 farmers are totally representative of farming in Limerick. I don't know, I wouldn't know enough to know that. They represent themselves, they're individuals. These are very highly individual spaces. Each farm is quite different from one another. So it's really like, I suppose, trying to grasp the essence of, it's a slice of life at a particular time in a particular place. I suppose that's really what I was trying to grasp and capture and retain. Yeah, I think that's really what more than anything else. I wasn't making any big statements. Having said that, going into this project, I was aware that in many respects, farming is topical. There's the whole environmental greenhouse effect. There's Brexit. There's issues with aging farmers who maybe have sons and daughters who are unable or don't want to take on the farm, and will it end with them after generations? There's all those issues. Some of those I think maybe might have been on the minds of some of the farmers, but I wasn't focusing on that. I was really focusing on just my experience, my visit, and it was 1 or 2 visits to each farm at that time. So it's really a slice of life in 2019 in farming in 5 farms in County Limerick.
But if art is meant to make us see the world differently, you definitely seem to have succeeded that. Like, I have never stopped to reflect on a heap of tires that would be used in a silage pit, or almost the laboratory-like sense of a milking parlour these days, or just the complexity and beauty of a corrugated roof, and all the different types of corrugation that have been used in the last century, and what they tell about either the economic prosperity of a farm at different times. And particularly, like, behind Una there is this like powerful image of a herd of cattle, of John McNamara's cows, which he sees as a business, which every day he will look at that grass and realize exactly how much feed they need of his grass to give them to prime condition. So you have made me see farming in a new way, in a more profound way. Like, would you like that? Would you like that people would stop and take stock and notice?
Well, yes, again, I can't preempt how people bring whatever they have, whatever their background is when they view work. But yes, that was what I was trying to convey, that I suppose it's just my experience of meeting these farmers, being on these wonderful farms, And I was surprised. In fact, I suppose what surprised me more than anything was a lot of the concerns. If you mentioned, say, the milking parlour, or I would have found it with painting Morgan Murphy's tractor as well. They're not 100% removed from painting reflections in suburban cars. Well, cars aren't only suburban; they're universal. But my like for shiny surfaces and reflections, which you can get in urban landscapes, you can get them in the suburbs. You also get them in a farmyard. So. I suppose I kind of got lost in that side of it as well. So I wasn't really thinking that things were that different. It's more like an extension of the practice rather than a complete jump.
Yeah. Mary, I realise though I'm out of my comfort zone asking you questions about the artistic element of those exhibitions. So I might hand over to Dr. NicGhabhann, a senior lecturer of Department of History at UL. And are you Assistant Dean? Are you a Faculty of Arts as well? Niamh, would you give...
I am. Thanks, Magan, and it's been such a pleasure to listen to the conversation and just to kind of get back in. I've had, like Magan, I've had the pleasure of writing an essay for the catalogue for this, and I have to say it was particularly pleasurable because I'm from that very landscape and I've walked on that grass, and I know probably some of those cows to pass. So it was a real pleasure, especially in lockdown when I'm not actually in that landscape, to be able to think about the farms of County Limerick and that landscape that's actually so close to me. So thank you, first of all, for capturing that slice of life. It's very meaningful to me personally. It's very meaningful, I think, to lots of people who live and love that life and that landscape. And to have that captured and to have that kind of caught in this moment so beautifully by you. So I think it's a really, really wonderful achievement. And I think it will, I hope so much that we're all able to go in and look and enjoy and stand in front of that incredible work in the beautiful Limerick City Gallery of Art before too long, because I think people are going to be really blown away by it when they do get to see it. So I suppose just picking up on some of the things that you've been talking about so far, I really like this, the fact that you're kind of really resisting the general all the time. So you're not saying, oh, it's just, I'm painting a farm, it's a farm, one farm can take the place of another farm, or this idea that, that you're kind of making some kind of general description of rural life, but that you're resisting that. You're saying it's a slice of life, it's this farm, it's this farmer. And to a certain extent, as Manchán was saying, it's again, getting us away from our assumptions and from our preconceived ideas maybe of what farming looks like, especially for those of us who aren't involved in farming. And one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was really just about, and we can see that quite large canvas behind Una, is to start just bringing us into the process of how you actually constructed the works. So did you go in, right? We know that you walked, you talked to people. Did you take photographs? Did you take preparatory sketches? How did you actually kind of start that process of building out the works themselves, and having had that kind of immersed experience in the farmyard to bring that back to the studio? What were the bits and pieces, or what were the sources that you kind of brought back into the studio from the farm itself?
Well, I would say, again, I had, and I was conscious of this in advance of visiting the farms, I had limited time. I mean, the farmers, they're busy people. So while I think in the case of that particular farm, your neighbour, John McNamara, I mean, he was very generous. I think we went there anticipating about maybe an hour and a half. I think 4 hours later, I was actually heading on the road after being given tea and cake and everything. I was a couple of hours later than I'd anticipated. But the only real way of gathering information was through photography. So I came armed with 3 cameras, and between the 5 farms, I took over 1,000 photographs. And that in itself, there's a whole sort of editing and weeding out process. I mean, you're not actually, well, the way I work anyway, I'm not necessarily reproducing a photograph. It's usually a combination of a number that jog the memory and the feeling I had when I was there. So I'm trying to recapture it, and I suppose the sensations I felt and experienced visiting the farm. And that visit and all the visits are still very, very vivid to me, even though it's almost 2 years since I last set foot on a farm. You get to a stage then that the photographs are visual reminders, I suppose, to that experience. So it's a combination of going through all of those, and that takes some time. 1,000 photographs is a lot to go through, and to whittle them down, and then you're working from a combination of those plus your memory, and then trying to reconstruct and recreate, and then on quite a large scale. So that's how it starts.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Mary. And I just wonder, in terms of using those images, just in terms of then plotting everything onto such large canvases, do you start kind of working with smaller preparatory sketches then, or do you start immediately working on that larger surface?
Well, to a certain extent, I would probably just do a few thumbnails just to get a sense of the shape of the canvas. I mean, in that particular one, it's a very much almost a sort of a panoramic proportion. It's not a typical proportion. I think it's about it's 70 centimeters by 180 centimeters, so it's a very long, atypical shape. And I had a lot of debates over whether I put more sky in and make it a different proportion, and I just felt it had more impact in that particular painting, just focusing in on the herd, which is so central to his farm. I mean, his farm is about, this is John McNamara's farm, is about the grass, the cattle, and the milking parlour. That's where everything happens. So it is, it's planned out. So the overall composition is planned out beforehand, and that would be drawings, diagrams, and then deciding just what I'm putting in, what I'm leaving out. And even then working out, is this something that needs to be large or small? And obviously in that particular case, that needed to be large. There's a lot of cows in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get this wonderful sense, it's very familiar again of, what it's like to have them all kind of coming towards you, or, that feeling of closeness and that feeling of intimacy, and you can practically hear them, which is fantastic. And just, you spoke as well about the fact that, for you, it's a bigger sky, it's a bigger landscape to the suburban environment. It's just a bigger horizon. Going from the more domestic scaled images to these. At what point in the process did you decide, I have to go big? I really have to. This requires big work.
Well, it was nearly, there was 2 stages to that. Initially, when I knew I was having the show in the Limerick City Art Gallery, I knew that just for the sake of the gallery, I would need some big pieces. And I initially thought, I'll do one large piece per farmer, and then the others will be more domestic scale. But then when I looked at the subject matter and the material that I had collected, more and more of them had to go big. And it meant I actually made more work for myself, but that was okay as well. And the only regret is that I wasn't able to even do more. I could have, there was so much material in each farm, I could have made a show out of each farm. I could spend the next 15 years on that project, but that wasn't quite an option. So we had to compress it. I would have even done, I ended up, I think, with about 12 large pieces, and then the rest are more domestic scale. I suppose if there had been more time, more of them would have gone big. They demanded it, the space, the subject, as you said, the vast landscape, and the big barns, the big sheds, the milking parlour in particular. There was so much detail in it. They just had to be big. And cows are big anyway.
They are. They are. Thinking on from that, I suppose, and in terms of the details that you have chosen throughout the show, so there's some images that, and some works that I suppose would be what we would consider kind of typically very beautiful scenes, you know, beautiful horizons, beautiful kind of portraits of the grassland and things like that. And then there's other things that maybe aren't usually considered the kind of beautiful parts of the countryside. It's funny actually, Manchán, you mentioned that you hadn't kind of considered all of the textures of a heap of tires. I love that, you know, I love that kind of, you know, the corrugated rusting, you know, the amount of textures and how they change on a farm. It's an incredibly visually vibrant, alive, constantly changing kind of a landscape. But it's maybe if you're working in it, it's not something that you're going to always think of as beautiful, because you're not going to be maybe standing back or giving yourself the time to stand back. It might be quite luxurious to be able to look over at a rusting corrugated roof and think, God, doesn't that look beautiful now in the sunshine? That might not be something that the farmers are doing all the time. And I just wonder, you know, what drew you to some of those textures? And you know, the milking parlour, it's such a striking image, all of that texture, all of that shiny surface, that complexity, but also things like, you know, the rusting side of a tractor, a corrugated roof, you know, some wires or ropes kind of down in a corner or brushes up against a wall. And these that are so satisfying from a painterly perspective, because you're working with all of these gorgeous textures and bringing those out. So what drew you to those? Why did you decide to focus on those particular moments? And also, were the farmers surprised that you decided to focus on those things at all?
Well, I don't think the farmers know at this point, so maybe they will be surprised. Again, I suppose particularly things like the Morgan's tractor or John's milking parlour, they're not a million miles away from the sort of concerns. They're very much the sort of painterly concerns that I would have dealt with in more urban and suburban settings. I mean, particularly I'd say in the case of the milking parlour, that's as complex as photographic reflections you'd find in a shop front or an airport terminal, or it's quite industrialized. But I wanted to get across that farming is it's a business, it's an industry. It's an industrialized landscape, so that while you have the tractor, I suppose, is almost a stereotypical image of a farm, but the milking parlour maybe wouldn't have been focused on quite so much, and it's so central. It's particularly central in the case of John's farm, and it's very much a central component. On the other hand, if you take the say the painting of his grass, when I was painting that, I didn't actually, it's grass and it's trees in the background and some sky. And when I was doing that, I was thinking, this is the grass that John has grown to feed his cattle. And it nearly surprised me when I was a good way through the painting, and the painting's 3.5 by 5 feet. I said, I've actually just painted a landscape. And it nearly shocked me, because if it was seen out of context, if it wasn't seen in the context of the barns and the milking parlour, it would actually just look like a landscape. And I thought, I never thought I'd end up painting landscapes, because I had already, even when I was approaching the farm, and insofar as I had preconceived ideas, I was thinking of it as an industrialized landscape. And that grass is industrialized in that he's very conscious of the pH content of the soil. He was pointing out to me that the color, he said, look at this, is sort of a blue hue to this. There's a blue color. I don't think he used the word hue, but he said that it has a blueness to the green, which of course as an artist I noticed, but he was aware of it. So I felt I was actually painting something industrial, and then suddenly stood back and thought, actually, this is a landscape. So
that's so interesting, because, and in my essay, I suppose that's one of the things I was really trying to unpack a little bit, was the difference between what we think of typically as landscape painting, which is very often anyway in the history of art something that you know someone comes very much focused on, this is a beautiful scene for me to consume and to take away. But this is something completely different, and it really kind of resists that, in that this is at home in the farm. It is about the lived landscape. It's about the landscape that's being lived, worked, explored, and also deeply valued and appreciated on a whole range of different levels. And I suppose, you know, one of the things I was kind of trying to look at when I was thinking about your work in a broader art historical kind of sweep was to think about, well, who are the other artists that do that kind of get away from being kind of pristine behind the canvas, and actually kind of going in and getting stuck in and to trying to capture that lived experience of the farm. And I just wonder, were there artists for you that I suppose, in terms of your painterly approach, but also in terms of thinking about landscape and thinking about farming and experience in that way, that you drew on, or that inspired you when you were thinking about this whole project?
Funnily enough, not really. I didn't think, I knew that there was going to be landscape. I knew there was going to be nature. But I would say I approached it in a similar way to the previous projects in Tallaght and Stradbally. That it was, I suppose, very much about a specific place. So each one of these farms, I think, as I've already said, was a particular place and unique in itself. So I didn't even think of it as landscape. I didn't even think of it in terms, I mean, everything has been tackled before. I'm sure there's, to some degree, I mean, people have said to me, oh, nobody paints suburbia. Not that many people paint suburbia maybe in Ireland, but there's a whole history of it in the UK and the States. The same way you could say, well, obviously there's been so much done on landscape, and I'm sure farms as well, and every subject has been covered, I suppose, and to a certain extent it's not helpful maybe in some ways to look at other people's work. I suppose, I mean, I'm not closed to it, but it was nearly, for me, it was coming as a natural progression from my other work. So I wasn't seeing the change in subject as such a jump, even though I think other people might see it as a jump.
Thanks. I just wonder, in terms of, you know, where this might bring you in, you know, what's next for you? I mean, do you think this whole project of engaging with these farms, with these different kinds of environments, do you think that's going to inform the work that you go on to do, or the next project that you think about? You know, you said you could have done an exhibition for each farm. Do you think you'll go back into that more rural industrial landscape in future?
Quite possibly. I wouldn't say definitely. A lot depends. Just in this project, the last three projects in particular, it is about interacting. The interaction with the individuals is very important to me, and this sort of the fact that they are specific places. So I suppose it depends on who I work with next. You know, that could bring me anywhere. One thing I suppose that this came was surprisingly out of, I would like to work big again. I would like to do more large work, whether that's rural or whether that's more industrial. I don't know. So I wouldn't be ruling farms out, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily going to be the immediate next project. Then again, I mean, if I get offers, who knows where it could take me. There's certainly, it's a very rich subject matter, but it could take you into all sorts of unexpected avenues. That's the great adventure.
Okay, one final question before maybe I can hand back to Una and Manchán to see if they have any other questions as well. Painting animals, that's hard. Was that a challenge for you, or was that something you had? Because that is a bit of a difference in terms of your work in the past. There's no lands in, you know, in suburbia. There's not many lands in suburbia.
No, there. I suppose the first challenge of painting animals, again, I keep on going back to Tallaght and to Stradbally. The first surprise was when I went into those houses, there were pets everywhere. So cats and dogs. Suddenly I had never painted cats and dogs before. I had to paint cats and dogs. Otherwise it wouldn't have been a true representation of those homes. Obviously there's somewhat larger animals when you've set foot on a farm. I had never painted a cow before. I started researching the anatomy of the cow. I said, if I get this wrong, I'm in trouble. Most people looking at it wouldn't, I'd probably get away with it, but I'm not with the farmers. They know their animals. So I hope I put a lot of work into trying to get those cows just right. And I hope that I have, but if anybody can catch me out, it'll be the farmers, because they know their animals. So hopefully I've got it right. That was something I had to do a bit of research with. I'd never done it before, but again, that's a challenge. That's exciting. So hopefully I got it right.
That's so interesting, because you are painting for such an expert audience, to a certain extent, an audience that's so expert in the textures and the shapes, the patterns, everything. But I think in a way, and again, I just hope so much that everyone can go in and view the work, and certainly will be able to view it online, but just that I think people are going to be really moved when they see their landscapes and their environments shown back to them, through your eyes and through your practice and what you've seen, and the different kind of beauty that you've been able to bring to the fore, and the beauty that's in a pile of tires, and the beauty that's in rust, and the beauty that's in all of these different textures. And I think I didn't grow up on a farm myself. My parents both did, and when they talk about the farm, they always talk about beauty. They really have these beautiful, vivid memories of it, and I think you've done such a beautiful job of capturing that slice of life. Yes, it is industrial, but it's really loved and it's really lived, and I think it's really extraordinary. So I'm going to hand back over now, maybe to Una and Manchán if they have any other questions. But thanks so much, Mary, for your work and for the chance to chat about it.
If I have time, I'm going to ask one other very quick question, and I might cut this out. But Mary, the question, so Niamh and me are saying again and again, this seems to be such an important cultural step, a social step, an artistic step, and as you're saying, no, it's a continuation. So I suppose now it's out of our hands. It's now up to the audience, the world, to decide what they make of this exhibition. But the big thing for me, it sounds kind of crass, is what is the farming industry going to make of it? What are farmers going to make of it? I think it's going to sell like hotcakes. And I think since the farming community have felt so ignored for so long, particularly modern industrial farming, and even one of the artists that whose farm you depicted, David Ryan in Lochgur, he had worked, as many farmers do, off farm in pubs in Limerick, and he said people had no idea of the modern farm. He said, in my experience, urban people don't understand farming at all. I found that people would ask questions that made clear they didn't have a clue. They felt that farming was like it was in the 1950s, that I had horse and carts. So from today on, we have this really exciting time where farmers will actually see this work and see how they are being represented in art. And as I would claim, for one of the first times in Ireland, are you nervous about that? Are you excited about that? What do you think is going to happen when farmers see your work?
Well, I was conscious when I was painting all the works that the farmers were going to see them. And if I didn't get it right, they would probably be my harshest critics. Because it's not just about, I could get very involved and did get very involved in the rust on Morgan Murphy's tractor, or all the piping and tubing and shiny surfaces in John McNamara's milking parlour. And, all of that is very challenging and enjoyable. But I was aware nobody knows the farms like the farmers. Any farmer coming in will see if I got something radically wrong, but these farmers, these are their farms that they know so well. And in most cases, they're their generations, they're 3-4 generations. So I did feel both a responsibility and I suppose, I wouldn't say I was anxious, but I wanted to get it right. I wanted to do them justice, and I also feel very appreciative of the trust and the generosity each farmer showed me, walking the farm with me, spending time with me, telling me all about their farms. And it's just they're so close to them. They are in love with their farms. They are so proud of their farms. They love their animals, and there's such passion there that it's not okay for me not to get that. So I suppose I hope that I've done them justice. I hope they feel I've done their farms justice.
Mary, thank you so much for making me see an aspect of my island that I hadn't focused on properly. I'll hand over to Una McCarthy, the director of the Limerick City Gallery of Art. Una.
Thank you for that really stimulating and most illuminating conversation. It's lovely to be able to eavesdrop every now and again and not to have to participate. But it was really fabulous. And I think, Mary, you know, and I think Manchán and Niamh also, that this project really chimed for me, not just in my professional capacity as director of the gallery, but also because it came so closely after the amalgamation of the city and county council. But most importantly, my own roots in rural County Limerick, or rather North Cork, but County Limerick, which is where my maternal grandparents were from. And that really stoked up that interest when Mary came with this proposal to me, because it really means something. You know, I can hear the emotion in my voice. But anyway, yeah, so as well as the exhibition, which is the powerhouse, you know, of all our thinking here, we've been extremely lucky to put together a public engagement program which will celebrate women farmers and poets and everything else, and that has all been put together by the creative producer Liz Kelly, and so ably assisted by that tech wizard Sarah Dowling. So thank you to them. There are many people I need and want indeed to thank, especially the farmers who, Mary, as you said, gave so generously, and you spoke a lot to me throughout the last while about their passion. And I can tell you, you have done each and every one of them justice, and they will be proud of the work, which I hope they will get to see. Curiously, and I think it is very exciting, Teagasc have come on board with support for this exhibition, and I'm really delighted that we've made those connections as well in a meaningful way, but also just in a way that kind of says, no, they're not separate. You know, we need to be challenging ourselves and maybe talking about issues that are central, particularly to this small island of ours. The team, as always, here in the gallery, you know, have worked so brilliantly, and I should also mention that as well as Mary's exhibition, which is at the centre of what we are doing, we have two other exhibitions, in fact. One is called Parr's Ireland, an exhibition of photography of 40 years of Martin Parr's work. And I put those two together because I thought there would be a really interesting conversation, particularly over the last 40 years. And how Ireland has changed, and some may say developed, and others may say not. And I also invited Adam Stoneman, who worked on a project with the Hunt Museum, ourselves, and Limerick Museum, to select work from the permanent collection. That was a kind of a counterpoint, really, to Mary's work. So he has selected work that is not representational, it's actually very other. And he's titled the exhibition, Cows Are Mostly Silent. It's the first line from a poem by Martina Evans, who will feature in a series of poems by poets about farms. So that will run over the course of this, and you will get details of all of that from our pages, which is www.limerickgallerypages.com. Really is a lot of exciting and I hope intriguing and valuable. To Niamh and Manchán, thank you for today, but also thank you for your wonderful and inspiring essays that are just so rich and wonderful to read, and they are part of the publication that will accompany this exhibition, and we will have that shortly. And finally, to the star of the show, thank you, Mary.